I've got a couple of complimentary plays for your Friday night card coming up in just a moment. I was going to take a look at the games between the Twins and the White Sox and the Angels and the Red Sox. It is hot out there. I got to tell you something. I'm back in Philadelphia where it's like 90 some degrees and 40% humidity, and it is much hotter here than it was last week in Vegas, where it was between 110 and 115 degrees every day with next to nothing in humidity. And again, people always say, oh, how can you possibly stand being in Vegas in the middle of summer? It's dry heat. Now, when the monsoon season hits, which is, well, right about now, the next couple of weeks through August, and the humidity rises in the Southwest, well, it definitely does change the weather out there, because when the humidity rises, it makes that 110, 112, 115 degree heat a little more unbearable. But right now on the East Coast, it sucks. It really does. Anyway, I am here and it's air conditioned, but it's still hot. So let's get to a couple of tidbits in history here for you. Today, in this date, in 2007, the final Harry Potter book, Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows, was released in 2007. On this date in 1899, Ernest Hemingway was born. A couple of famous comedians born on this date as well. Robin Williams in 1951, and in 1924 in Morgantown, West Virginia, Barney Fife himself, Don Knotts, was born. If you happen to be like me and ever studied communications back in the late 70s, early 80s, you had to be bored to death by the studies of Marshall McLuhan, who was, of course, known for the medium is the message. Or, if you happen to be a Woody Allen fan and you ever saw the movie Annie Hall, there is that great sequence where Woody and Diane Keaton are standing in the movie line, and Woody is just going nuts because he's bored to tears and annoyed by the guy standing behind him, who is just going off because he's a know-it-all on everything about film. And he brings up Marshall McLuhan at one time, and Woody just steps out and breaks the fourth wall and brings Marshall McLuhan into the scene. And Marshall McLuhan, of course, tells the know-it-all that you know absolutely nothing about my works. It's just a great classic example of breaking the fourth wall in cinema, and that's probably where you know who Marshall McLuhan is. Of course, the biggest thing in pop culture on this day, a little album called Appetite for Destruction was released on this day in 1987 by a band called Guns N' Roses. Had a couple of songs on it you may have heard of. Paradise City, Welcome to the Jungle, Sweet Child of Mine. And the interesting thing about it, it didn't make its debut on the Billboard 200 album chart until about 3 weeks later, and when it debuted at 182, would not top the Billboard 200 chart for another 49 weeks. It took GNR going on tour. It took heavy play, video play on MTV. But ultimately, then it started a long, year-long run in the top 100, a 10-week run, I think, at number one. An album that cost $365,000 to make was eventually certified 18 times platinum. I mentioned in a video just last week, my son, huge Guns N' Roses fan. So when they went and played Coachella and reunited finally after years of speculation last year, I got him for his 21st birthday present. I got him Coachella tickets, him and his three best friends, and I flew him out to Indio, California. And it didn't matter anybody else playing during the 3-day festival. All they were there for was GNR. So they had a purpose in life. That was it. GNR. That's all that mattered. So that day of the festival, they got right up there first thing in the morning, right there at the gate at stage side, and they sat there, the four of them, for 12 hours. So when GNR played that night, they were right there, first at the stage, as close as you could possibly be. So that made his life. That was the 21st birthday present he will never forget. And I have the bill to prove for it as well. So anyway, that's what happened on this day. Let's get to your complimentary plays. By the way, just going back to yesterday's tidbits, which I happened to write on the on the website because everybody was just so fascinated with OJ yesterday. It just like overlooked that here on This Date in History yesterday was the day that the man landed on the moon, and it was like nobody remembered, nobody cared. It's like OJ. That's all anybody cared about yesterday. You know, it's just amazing. Just amazing how people like nobody cared yesterday about that minor little event. I don't know about you if you were alive back then. I mean, I was a little kid. I remember I was at my grandmother's house, my grandparents' house that day, and my sister and I. And I remember, I mean, there must have been like 30 people packed at my grandparents' house then, in what was it, 1969? I mean, and all watching in front of this. Remember back then they had these, TVs were big pieces of furniture. I remember my grandfather had the Zenith TV, color TV, and we're all watching this black and white thing. And of course, I'm a little kid. I didn't really understand the big overall significance of it. But looking back, I found the most interesting thing was there's my great grandmother who came over in Ellis Island from Italy, years earlier. Somebody who was born before television, before electricity, before radio. My grandparents and her lived through the Depression, and here, all these years later, watching man land on the moon. Now at my age, looking back at the significance of what it must have been for them to be sitting there watching something like this on television, it must have been just phenomenal for that era, for that age group to have seen something like that in their lifespan. Really amazing stuff. Anyway, we continue on. Let's get to your complimentary play. First of all, I'm kind of surprised the Minnesota Twins overnight when I handicapped this game. The line I thought was pushing 145. The seat at 135 right now. Hey, I'm a buyer. I'll take the Twins minus $1.35 with Urban Santana at home against Detroit and Anibal Sanchez. Santana 9-4 this season with a 9-4 lifetime with a 3.08 ERA, lifetime against the Tigers, who are going with Anibal Sanchez, whose last start against Toronto at home was not his finest since rejoining the rotation, as he gave up 9 hits and 5 runs, including 3 homers and 6 innings. Minnesota opened its homestand by taking 2 out of 3 against the Yankees. Meanwhile, the Tigers, after opening the road trip by taking the first 2 games of a series at Kansas City, lost the past 2 days 4-3, and then last night 16-4, and they're not a very good road team to begin with. So again, I'll invest on the Twins in this one at home at a cheap chalk price. Meanwhile, I see the Boston Red Sox. Hey, you got to play them on the run line, but why not with Chris Sale minus $1.15, laying the 1.5 runs against the Angels and Ricky Nolasco. The Angels have lost 10 of their last 15 games. Ricky Nolasco, 4.42 earned run average and 9 home starts. The Angels have lost 12 of his last 14 starts. Meanwhile, Chris Sale, when he was a member of the White Sox, he faced the Angels 8 times. 6 of those times were starting assignments, and he went 5-0 with a 1.39 earned run average in those starts. Now, the Red Sox have lost each of his last 2 starts, but that's because one time the bullpen blew a late lead, and the other time he was victimized by a lack of offensive support. But he has simply been the most dominant pitcher in the American League this season. And although the Red Sox have not been playing great ball here, as they just wrapped up a 4-4 homestand after losing yesterday at home 8-6 Fenway to the Blue Jays, I would still much rather take the Red Sox in this spot with Sale going against Nolasco and laying the 1.5 runs in this contest. Of the 2 plays, I lean a little more toward Minnesota's the better of the 2, especially at the reduced price at minus 135. So Minnesota, and again, the Red Sox on the run line are your 2 complimentary plays, with me leaning toward Minnesota as the better of those 2 free selections. That'll do it, guys. I wish you well, and I'll talk to you again tomorrow when we do this one more time.